A farmer fights a corrupt sheriff to protect his neighbor's land, but the next day, FBI helicopters surround the station, and what they discover is shocking. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The morning dew clung to the tall grass as Samuel Mercer walked the eastern boundary of his farm, his weathered boots leaving dark impressions in the wet earth. At 62, Sam still moved with the deliberate grace of a man who had spent his life working the land. His eyes, sharp and clear beneath the brim of his faded cap, scanned the fence line with practiced precision. Behind him, his German shepherd, Duke, trotted faithfully, occasionally stopping to investigate an interesting scent. The sun was just beginning to crest over the rolling hills of Riverdale County, painting the landscape in hues of amber and gold. It was Sam's favorite time of day, when the world felt fresh and full of promise. But today, that familiar sense of peace was disturbed by a nagging worry that had kept him up most of the night. "What do you think, Duke?" Sam murmured, stopping to examine a section of fence. "Something's not right here." The dog looked up at him with intelligent eyes, ears perked forward attentively. Sam knelt down, running his fingers along the wooden post where his property met Eleanor Winter's land. Eleanor, a widow in her 70s, had been his neighbor for nearly 30 years. Her husband, Frank, had been one of Sam's closest friends until cancer took him 5 years ago. Since then, Sam had made it his business to keep an eye on Eleanor's place, helping with repairs and heavy work whenever needed. The post had been deliberately damaged, the wood splintered as if someone had taken an axe to it. Sam frowned, straightening up slowly as his knees protested the movement. "Vandals again," he muttered, though he didn't believe it. This was the third incident of property damage along this boundary in 2 weeks. First, it had been a section of fence knocked down on Eleanor's side. Then her storage shed had been broken into, though strangely nothing was taken. Now this. Duke suddenly growled, his body tensing as he stared down the fence line. Sam followed his gaze and spotted a black SUV slowly making its way along the dirt road that separated his property from Eleanor's. The vehicle didn't belong to anyone local, and it moved with a deliberate slowness that set Sam's teeth on edge. "Easy, boy," he said quietly, placing a calming hand on Duke's head as they watched the SUV continue past, dust billowing in its wake. Sam checked his watch. Barely 7 in the morning. Too early for casual sightseers, and definitely too early for the kind of slick-looking city vehicle that had just passed by. He made a mental note of the license plate before continuing his inspection of the fence. By the time Sam returned to his farmhouse, the sun was fully up, and he could see Eleanor outside in her garden. He waved, and she straightened, raising a gloved hand in greeting. After quickly feeding Duke, Sam walked across the connecting field that served as a shortcut between their properties. "Morning, Eleanor," he called as he approached. "How are you today?" Eleanor Winters pushed a strand of silver hair from her face and smiled. Despite her age, she maintained a vitality that Sam had always admired. "Can't complain, Sam," she replied, though her expression told a different story. "Garden's coming along nicely this year." Sam nodded, looking over the neat rows of vegetables. "Saw more damage to the fence line this morning. Someone took an axe to one of the posts on my side." Eleanor's smile faded. "I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Had another visitor yesterday. Man in a suit this time, not just those workmen from last week." "What did he want?" Sam asked, already suspecting the answer. "Same as before. Wanted to know if I'd reconsidered their offer." Eleanor pulled off her gardening gloves with more force than necessary. "I told him the same thing I told the others. This land isn't for sale, not at any price." Sam nodded, unsurprised. "Black SUV? Tinted windows?" "That's the one," Eleanor confirmed. "How did you know?" "Saw it driving along the boundary this morning." Sam didn't mention the deliberate way it had moved, like it was sizing up the properties. "You know who they're representing yet?" Eleanor's mouth tightened into a thin line. "They say it's North Star Development. Want to build some kind of resort complex, but... She hesitated. But, Sam prompted. Sheriff Mills was with them this time. Eleanor's voice dropped slightly, standing right beside that suit-wearing fella like they were old friends. Sam's expression darkened. Sheriff Leland Mills had been elected 3 years ago, running on a platform of modernizing Riverdale County. Since then, he'd surrounded himself with deputies who weren't local, men who treated the longtime residents with barely concealed contempt. What did Mills have to say? Sam asked. That I should consider the offer carefully, Eleanor replied, her chin lifting defiantly. Said at my age, I should be thinking about retirement, not working the land. Called it a generous opportunity. Sam felt a familiar anger building in his chest. It's not his place to tell you what to do with your property. That's what I said, Eleanor agreed, though perhaps not so politely. A ghost of a smile crossed her face before fading again. Sam, there's something else. After they left, I saw one of the sheriff's deputies parked down the road just watching my place. Sat there for hours. Sam frowned. Intimidation tactics. It worked, Eleanor admitted quietly. I didn't sleep well last night. You thinking about selling? Sam asked, careful to keep any judgment from his voice. It was her land, after all. Eleanor shook her head firmly. Frank and I built this place from nothing. Raised our children here. I'm not leaving just because some developer wants to build a golf course or whatever nonsense they're planning. She paused, looking at Sam with sudden vulnerability. But I'm not going to lie, Sam. They're making me nervous. I understand, Sam said, and he did. Eleanor was tough as nails, but she was still a 73-year-old woman living alone. Tell you what, I'll start making my rounds a bit wider. Take in more of your property line. Duke's got a good nose for strangers. I'd appreciate that, Eleanor said, relief evident in her voice. Frank always said you were the best neighbor a person could ask for. Sam shrugged off the compliment. Just being a decent human being. Something the sheriff seems to have forgotten about. After promising to check in again later, Sam headed back to his own place, his mind turning over the situation. The involvement of Sheriff Mills complicated things. The man had authority and wasn't shy about using it, especially against those he saw as standing in the way of what he called progress. Back at his house, Sam put on a pot of coffee and sat down at his kitchen table, where a stack of mail awaited his attention. Most of it was the usual bills and catalogs, but one envelope stood out, official-looking, with the county seal stamped in the corner. He opened it with a growing sense of unease. The letter inside was brief and to the point. The county was notifying him of a property reassessment, resulting in a significant increase in his tax bill. Sam stared at the new figure, which was nearly double what he had paid the previous year. Well, that's a coincidence, he muttered to himself, Duke raising his head at the sound of his master's voice. The timing was too perfect to be accidental. Right when developers were pressing Eleanor to sell, suddenly his own tax burden increases dramatically. Sam's farm was profitable, but margins were tight. A tax increase of this magnitude would strain his finances considerably. He wondered how many other local farmers had received similar notices, and how many would be forced to consider selling as a result. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Bill Harmon, whose farm bordered Sam's property to the north. Sam, you get one of these tax reassessment letters? Bill asked without preamble, his voice tight with anger. Just opened mine, Sam confirmed. Let me guess, yours doubled too? Nearly tripled, Bill replied. Can't afford it, Sam. Not with the way corn prices have been this year. This isn't right, Sam said, his suspicion hardening into certainty. Too many coincidences. First Eleanor gets pressured to sell, now these tax hikes. You think they're connected? Bill asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Sheriff Mills was personally escorting North Star's representative around Eleanor's place yesterday, Sam said. And now suddenly we're all facing tax increases that would make selling to developers look mighty attractive. Bill was silent for a moment. "What are you thinking, Sam?" Sam considered the question carefully. He wasn't a man who rushed into conflict, but he also wasn't one to stand by while others were bullied. "I'm thinking we need to find out exactly what's going on before more of us get pushed out. Can you call around? See how many others got these notices?" "I'll start making calls now," Bill agreed. "What are you going to do?" Sam glanced at his shotgun mounted above the fireplace, not as a potential weapon, but as a reminder of his father's words long ago. "Stand your ground when you know you're right." "I'm going to have a chat with our sheriff," he said finally. "Seems like he's got some explaining to do." After hanging up, Sam stood at his kitchen window, looking out over the fields that had been in his family for 4 generations. Across the way, he could see Eleanor's place, smaller but just as well tended. Beyond that were the other family farms that made up the heart of Riverdale County. Sam had never considered himself an activist or a troublemaker. He'd always believed in working hard, minding his own business and helping neighbors when they needed it. But something was happening here, something that threatened not just his way of life, but the entire community he loved. Duke came to stand beside him, sensing his mood. Sam placed a hand on the dog's head, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Looks like we've got a fight on our hands, boy," he said quietly, "and I don't think it's going to be an easy one." The Riverdale County Sheriff's Department occupied a squat brick building on the edge of town. Sam parked his battered pickup truck in the visitor's lot, drawing curious glances from the 2 deputies standing outside. Neither were locals. Sam didn't recognize their faces, which only reinforced his suspicions about the direction Mills was taking the department. "Stay, Duke," Sam instructed, leaving the window cracked for the dog. Duke settled obediently onto the passenger seat, eyes alert and watchful. Inside, the reception area was cool and impersonal, a far cry from the welcoming space it had been under the previous sheriff. The young woman at the front desk looked up as Sam entered, her expression neutral. "Can I help you?" she asked, her fingers hovering over a computer keyboard. "I'd like to speak with Sheriff Mills, please," Sam said, removing his cap. "It's about the recent property tax reassessments." The receptionist gave him a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" "No, ma'am, I don't. But it's an important matter affecting several local farmers. I won't take much of his time." She looked doubtful, but picked up the phone, speaking quietly into the receiver. After a brief exchange, she nodded and hung up. "Sheriff Mills can give you 5 minutes," she said. "Down the hall, last door on the right." Sam thanked her and made his way through the building, noting the changes since his last visit nearly a year ago. New surveillance cameras in the corners, unfamiliar faces in the offices, sleek equipment. Where once there had been serviceable but outdated technology, the department had certainly come into money recently. Sheriff Leland Mills was waiting behind his desk when Sam entered, not bothering to stand or offer his hand. At 45, Mills was relatively young for his position, with a carefully maintained physique and the kind of polished good looks that had served him well on campaign posters. His uniform was pressed and pristine, the badge on his chest gleaming under the office lights. "Mr. Mercer," Mills said with a thin smile, "what can I do for you today? I understand you have concerns about your tax assessment." "Not just mine," Sam replied, remaining standing since Mills hadn't invited him to sit. "Several farms in the county have received notices. Some bills have nearly tripled." Mills leaned back in his chair, affecting a sympathetic expression. "Property values in the area have increased substantially over the past year. The reassessments simply reflect current market realities." "Funny timing, though," Sam said. "These notices arriving just as North Star Development starts pressuring local landowners to sell." A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps or wariness, crossed Mills's face before his professional mask slipped back into place. I'm not sure what one has to do with the other, Mr. Mercer. The county assessor's office operates independently of any private development interests. That's so? Sam kept his voice level. Then why were you personally escorting North Star representatives around Eleanor Winters' property yesterday? Mills's eyes narrowed slightly. Mrs. Winters called in a complaint about trespassers. I was responding to that call and found North Star representatives who had apparently misunderstood the property boundaries. I simply clarified the situation. It was a smooth lie, delivered with practiced ease. Sam wondered how many others Mills had fed similar lines to. And I suppose it's also a coincidence that one of your deputies spent hours watching her place afterward, making sure she understood the property boundaries. Mills straightened in his chair, his friendly demeanor cooling. Mr. Mercer, my deputies patrol the entire county. If one was in Mrs. Winters' vicinity, it was part of their regular duties. Regular duties don't involve intimidation tactics, Sam said firmly. The sheriff stood slowly, placing both palms on his desk and leaning forward. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Mercer. I'd be careful about making statements you can't back up with evidence. The threat was thinly veiled, but Sam held his ground. I'm just connecting the dots, Sheriff. North Star wants land. Owners don't want to sell. Suddenly there's property damage, tax hikes, and law enforcement pressure. Doesn't take a detective to see what's happening here. What's happening, Mills said coldly, is that Riverdale County is finally moving into the 21st century. North Star's development would bring jobs, tourism, and tax revenue that would benefit everyone. But some people, his gaze fixed pointedly on Sam, seemed determined to cling to the past at the expense of progress. Progress. Sam couldn't keep the edge from his voice now. Is that what you call forcing people off land their families have worked for generations? Mills straightened up, his expression hardening. No one's being forced to do anything. North Star is making generous offers, well above market value. If some aging farmers choose to cash in and retire comfortably, that's their business. He glanced at his watch. And speaking of business, your 5 minutes are up. I have actual police work to attend to. Sam didn't move. This isn't over, Sheriff. Whatever you and North Star are planning, people around here won't stand for it. Mills smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Mr. Mercer, let me give you some friendly advice. Don't make this personal. You're one farmer nearing retirement age. North Star Development is a multi-million-dollar corporation with connections in the state capital. Who do you think comes out ahead in that fight? Depends on whether the fight's fair, Sam replied evenly. Life rarely is, Mills said, reaching for his phone. Jennings, please escort Mr. Mercer out. A moment later, a burly deputy appeared at the door. Sam gave Mills one last long look before turning to leave. Dignity intact, but anger simmering just below the surface. Outside, he slid behind the wheel of his pickup, Duke greeting him with a soft whine. That went about as well as expected, Sam muttered, scratching the dog's ears. He sat for a moment, gathering his thoughts, then pulled out his cell phone and dialed. Hello? Eleanor's voice came through clearly. It's Sam. Just had a chat with our sheriff. He claims he was at your place yesterday because you called in a complaint about trespassers. There was a pause. Then Eleanor snorted. That's a bald-faced lie. I never called the sheriff's office. Figured as much, Sam said grimly. Listen, I'm headed over to Bill Harmon's place. He's been calling around about these tax notices. Can you meet us there in about an hour? I think we need to get everyone together and figure out what we're dealing with. I'll be there, Eleanor promised. Should I bring anything? Sam thought for a moment. Those business cards the North Star people left you, if you still have them, and any paperwork they gave you about their offers. After hanging up, Sam started the truck and pulled out of the parking lot, acutely aware of the eyes watching him from the sheriff's office. As he drove through town, he noted other changes that had escaped his attention before. New construction on the outskirts, a few empty storefronts where local businesses had recently closed, unfamiliar faces on the sidewalks. Riverdale was changing, and not necessarily for the better. What had once been a close-knit farming community was slowly being transformed into something else, something with less character and more commercial appeal. By the time Sam reached Bill Harmon's farm, several vehicles were already parked in the gravel driveway. News traveled fast in small communities, especially when that news affected livelihoods. Inside Bill's spacious kitchen, Sam found a gathering of concerned neighbors, about a dozen in all, representing most of the farms in the eastern part of the county. Eleanor was already there, deep in conversation with Marion Thompson, who ran the county's last remaining dairy operation. Bill clapped Sam on the shoulder as he entered. "Word's getting around," he said, his lined face grim. "Everyone I called had gotten one of those tax notices, and they've all had visits from North Star." Sam nodded, taking in the worried faces around the room. These were proud people, independent and not easily frightened. But now there was genuine concern in their expressions, a sense that something beyond their control was threatening everything they had built. "What did the sheriff have to say?" Bill asked, leading Sam toward the coffee pot. "Denied everything, of course," Sam replied, accepting a steaming mug. "Claimed the tax reassessments were just coincidence, said he was at Eleanor's because she called in trespassers." "Which I did not," Eleanor interjected firmly from across the room. "He's in North Star's pocket," Marion Thompson said, her normally cheerful face set in uncharacteristic lines of anger. "Clear as day." There were murmurs of agreement around the room. "Question is, what can we do about it?" asked James Chen, a second-generation farmer whose family had operated one of the county's most successful orchards for decades. "If the reassessments are official—" "We challenge them," Sam said, turning to address the room. "Collectively. The county has procedures for appealing property tax assessments. We all file appeals all at once. Make them justify these increases. And while we're at it," Bill added, "we start documenting everything. Every visit from North Star, every suspicious incident, every interaction with the sheriff's department. Build a case." Eleanor pulled several business cards and a folder of papers from her purse. "I've kept everything they've given me. The last representative, a man named Victor Rawlings, was particularly insistent. Said the offer wouldn't stay on the table forever." Sam took one of the cards, studying the embossed North Star Development logo. "We need to find out more about this company, who they are, what they've done in other communities, who's backing them." "My daughter's good with computers," Marion offered. "She can research them." "And we should talk to Miguel at the county clerk's office," James suggested. "He might have insight into how these reassessments got pushed through so quickly." Sam felt a small surge of hope as the conversation continued, plans taking shape around the kitchen table. These were practical, resourceful people who knew how to work together when facing adversity. If anyone could stand up to the combined pressure of a corrupt sheriff and a powerful development company, it was this group. But as the meeting progressed, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing pieces of the puzzle. Why was North Star so determined to acquire this particular cluster of properties? And how far would Sheriff Mills go to help them get what they wanted? One thing was certain: this was just the beginning of the fight, and they would need to be prepared for what came next. The next morning dawned clear and warm, promising another beautiful summer day. But for Sam, the beauty was overshadowed by a growing sense of urgency. After the meeting at Bill's farm, everyone had gone home with assignments: research to conduct, documents to gather, neighbors to contact. The fight was taking shape, but Sam couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. He was halfway through his morning chores when his cell phone rang. It was James Chen, his voice tight with concern. "Sam, you need to get over to Eleanor's right away. There's trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Sam asked, already heading for his truck. "Sheriff's deputies. They're claiming there's been a complaint about illegal structures on her property, They've got some kind of inspection order. Sam's jaw tightened. I'm on my way. Have you called anyone else? Bill and Marion are already heading over. I'm 5 minutes out. See you there? Sam hung up, whistled for Duke, and jumped into his pickup. The tires kicked up dust as he sped down the dirt road that connected his property to Eleanor's. When he arrived, 2 Sheriff's Department SUVs were parked in Eleanor's driveway. 3 deputies, none of them local men, stood facing Eleanor on her front porch. She had drawn herself up to her full height of 5'3" and was clutching a piece of paper in one hand. This is private property, Eleanor was saying as Sam approached, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. And there are no illegal structures here. This so-called inspection is nothing but harassment. One of the deputies, a tall man with a crew cut, stepped forward. Ma'am, we have a valid order signed by Judge Hawkins. If you refuse to comply, we'll have no choice but to cite you for obstruction. Sam strode up quickly, Duke at his heels. Morning, gentlemen, he said, positioning himself beside Eleanor. Seems to be some confusion here. The lead deputy turned to him with obvious annoyance. This doesn't concern you, sir. Please return to your own property. I'm here at Mrs. Winters' request, Sam said calmly, a white lie but necessary under the circumstances. As her neighbor and friend, may I see this inspection order? Eleanor handed him the paper she'd been holding. Sam scanned it quickly, noting the official letterhead and Judge Hawkins' signature at the bottom. The document cited credible reports of non-permitted agricultural structures that required immediate inspection. Interesting timing, Sam remarked, handing the paper back to the deputy. These alleged structures have been reported just as North Star Development happens to be pressuring Mrs. Winters to sell her land. The deputy's expression remained impassive. I wouldn't know anything about that, sir. We're just here to do our job. Of course you are, Sam said. He turned to Eleanor. Why don't you allow them to conduct their inspection? We'll accompany them, of course, to ensure nothing is damaged or disturbed. Eleanor looked like she wanted to argue, but then gave a tight nod. Fine. But they stay where I can see them. The deputies exchanged glances, clearly unhappy about having witnesses, but the lead officer nodded. Let's get this done quickly. As they began walking the property, Bill Harmon's truck pulled up, followed closely by Marion Thompson's SUV and James Chen's Prius. The deputies watched with visible displeasure as Eleanor's neighbors joined the impromptu procession around her farm. Quite the welcoming committee, the lead deputy muttered. We take care of our own around here, Bill replied cheerfully, though his eyes were hard as he watched the officers. The inspection was thorough but ultimately fruitless. Eleanor's farm was meticulously maintained, with every structure properly permitted and in good repair. After an hour of searching, the deputies had found nothing to justify their presence. Satisfied? Eleanor asked, as they all returned to the front yard. The lead deputy made a show of checking boxes on a form. We'll file our report. If there are any issues, you'll be notified. I'm sure I will be, Eleanor said dryly. As the deputies prepared to leave, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the driveway. The vehicle that Sam had seen driving slowly along the property line the previous day. The driver's door opened, and a man in an expensive suit stepped out. Tall and lean, with silver-streaked dark hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to getting his way, he surveyed the gathering with obvious surprise. Well, this is quite a scene, he said, his voice smooth and cultured. Mrs. Winters, I'd hoped to catch you alone for our follow-up discussion. There's nothing to discuss, Mr. Rawlings, Eleanor replied firmly. As I told you yesterday, my land is not for sale. Victor Rawlings, the North Star representative whose business card Sam had examined at Bill's house, smiled thinly. I understand your attachment to the property, but I really think you should reconsider our offer. The price is more than generous, and frankly, his gaze swept over the gathered farmers. The economic realities of small-scale agriculture are only going to become more challenging. Is that a threat? Sam asked quietly. Rawlings turned to him, eyebrows raised. Not at all. Simply an observation based on market trends, and you are... Sam Mercer, Eleanor's neighbor. Ah, yes. Another property on our acquisition list. Rawlings reached into his jacket and produced a business card, which Sam pointedly did not take. When you're ready to discuss your own options, Mr. Mercer, I'd be happy to outline the benefits of selling to North Star. Seems like those benefits include harassing inspections and suspicious tax reassessments, Marion Thompson said, stepping forward. Not to mention property damage. Rawlings' expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. I have no idea what you're talking about. North Star Development operates ethically and legally in all our dealings. Yet you always seem to show up right after the Sheriff's Department puts pressure on the very properties you're interested in buying, James Chen observed. Quite the coincidence. The deputies, who had been watching the exchange with poorly concealed interest, now moved toward their vehicles. We're done here, the lead officer announced. Mrs. Winters, you'll receive a copy of our report. Rawlings watched them leave, then turned back to the group, his pleasant demeanor slightly strained. I can see this isn't a good time for constructive discussion. Mrs. Winters, I'll reach out to schedule a more private meeting. Don't bother, Eleanor said. My answer won't change. We'll see, Rawlings replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. He nodded to the group and returned to his SUV, driving away with a spray of gravel. Once he was gone, Eleanor let out a long breath, her shoulders sagging slightly. Thank you all for coming. I don't think they would have been so professional if I'd been alone. That's exactly why they targeted you first, Bill said grimly. They figured an older woman living alone would be easier to intimidate. They figured wrong, Eleanor replied, straightening her spine. Sam was staring down the driveway, his mind working. The timing of all this isn't accidental. Rawlings shows up immediately after the deputies leave. They're coordinating their efforts. But why? James asked. What's so special about our farms? There's plenty of land in the county that would be easier to acquire. Marion shook her head. It's got to be something specific about this area. The location, the resources, something that makes these particular properties valuable to them. My daughter found some information about North Star last night, she continued, pulling out her phone. They're not just a development company. They're a subsidiary of Carlyle International, a major corporation with interests in everything from hotels to mining operations. Mining? Sam repeated, a suspicion beginning to form. Marion nodded. Apparently, there have been geological surveys in this region recently. Something about rare earth minerals used in electronics manufacturing. The group fell silent as the implications sank in. If valuable minerals had been discovered beneath their farms, it would explain North Star's determination to acquire the land and the urgency of their tactics. We need to confirm this, Sam said finally. Find out if there have been any mining permits filed or pending. If they're after minerals, they'll need state approval for extraction. My cousin works for the Department of Natural Resources, Bill offered. I can ask her to check their records. And we need to move forward with our appeals on these tax reassessments, James added. The deadline's coming up fast. Sam nodded, his resolve hardening. In the meantime, we need to watch out for each other. No one should be alone when dealing with North Star or the Sheriff's Department. They're trying to pick us off one by one. Safety in numbers, Eleanor agreed. Just like the old days when farmers would band together for barn raisings and harvests. Exactly, Sam said. And we need to reach out to the other farmers in the county, especially those who've received tax notices. The more of us stand together, the harder it will be for them to push us around. As the group began to disperse, making plans to meet again the following evening, Sam noticed a patrol car parked on the road beyond Eleanor's property. It was too far away to identify the occupants, but the message was clear. They were being watched. "Stay at my place tonight," Sam told Eleanor quietly. "I don't like the idea of you being here alone." Eleanor looked like she might protest, then glanced at the distant patrol car and nodded. "Just for tonight. I'll pack a bag." As Sam waited for her on the porch, he found himself thinking about his father and grandfather, who had faced their own challenges to keep the family farm going through wars, economic depressions, and changing times. They had never backed down from a fight when their way of life was threatened. Neither would he. The community center in downtown Riverdale was packed to capacity the following evening. What had started as a small meeting of neighboring farmers had grown into something much larger. Word had spread quickly through the county, and now nearly 60 people filled the room. Farmers, local business owners, and longtime residents, all concerned about the sudden changes affecting their community. Sam stood near the front, watching as more people filed in. He hadn't expected such a turnout, but the sight of so many familiar faces gave him hope. Next to him, Bill Harmon had set up a projector and laptop, while Marion Thompson's daughter, Alyssa, typed furiously on her own computer, preparing to share what she'd discovered about North Star Development. Eleanor sat in the front row, her back straight and her expression determined. She'd spent the previous night at Sam's farm as planned, and though she'd returned to her own home that morning, the experience of being driven from her property, even temporarily, had only strengthened her resolve. "Quite a crowd," James Chen remarked, joining Sam at the front. "Even old Frank Wilson's here, and he hasn't left his farm for anything but church in 15 years. Sam nodded, scanning the room. People are worried and angry. These aren't just tax hikes anymore. This is about the future of Riverdale. At 7 o'clock sharp, Bill cleared his throat and called the meeting to order. The room quieted as he explained the situation. The coordinated pressure from North Star Development and the Sheriff's Department, the suspicious tax reassessments, the targeted harassment of property owners who refused to sell. "We're here tonight to share information and organize our response," Bill concluded. "Because if we don't stand together now, we're going to lose everything our families have built in this county." There was a murmur of agreement throughout the room. Bill then introduced Alyssa Thompson, who stepped forward with the confidence of the tech-savvy younger generation. "I've been researching North Star Development and their parent company, Carlisle International," she began, clicking through to her first slide. "What I found is pretty disturbing." The screen displayed a complex web of corporate entities, with Carlisle at the center and dozens of subsidiaries branching outward. Carlisle International is a multinational corporation with a market cap of over $12 billion, Alyssa explained. They operate in 37 countries through various subsidiaries, including North Star Development, which handles their North American real estate acquisitions. She clicked to the next slide, showing a map dotted with red markers. These are communities where North Star has previously acquired large tracts of land. In every case, they promised economic development, resorts, shopping centers, residential communities. But in at least 7 of these locations, once they secured the land, the plans changed. Alyssa zoomed in on one of the markers, showing a vast open-pit mine. This was formerly agricultural land in Idaho. After North Star bought up the local farms, Carlisle's mining division, GeoCore, discovered a significant deposit of rare earth minerals essential for electronics manufacturing. The resort never materialized, but the mining operation has been running for 5 years. A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. Alyssa continued, showing similar examples in Nevada, Arizona, and Pennsylvania. "But here's where it gets really interesting," she said, switching to a geological survey map of Riverdale County. 3 years ago, the U.S. Geological Survey conducted a comprehensive analysis of mineral deposits in this region. Their findings were published in a scientific journal, but didn't get much attention locally. The map showed a distinctive pattern beneath the eastern portion of the county, precisely where Sam, Eleanor, and the others owned their farms. According to this survey, there's a high probability of significant rare earth mineral deposits in this area, the same type of minerals that Carlisle is mining in their other locations. So they're not after our land for a resort at all, Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence that followed Alyssa's revelation. It appears not, Alyssa confirmed. And there's one more thing. 6 months ago, GeoCorp filed preliminary paperwork with the State Department of Natural Resources, expressing interest in mineral exploration in Riverdale County. Bill's cousin at the DNR had come through with crucial information. Sam exchanged glances with Bill, the pieces falling into place. This wasn't just about pushing out a few farmers. It was a calculated corporate strategy to acquire land with valuable resources as cheaply as possible. What about the sheriff? Someone called from the back of the room. How does he fit into all this? Alyssa hesitated, then clicked to her final slide, a campaign finance report for Sheriff Mills' election 3 years earlier. Riverdale Holdings, LLC, made a substantial contribution to Mills' campaign, she said. It took some digging, but Riverdale Holdings is a shell company that traces back to Carlisle International. The room erupted in angry voices. Bill raised his hands, trying to restore order. We need to stay focused, he urged. This isn't just about exposing what they're doing, it's about stopping them. Sam stepped forward. Bill's right. Knowledge is only valuable if we use it. He surveyed the crowd, meeting the eyes of people he'd known all his life. We need to fight this on multiple fronts. First, the legal angle. Everyone who received a tax reassessment needs to file an appeal immediately. We can help each other with the paperwork tonight. James Chen stood up. My brother's a lawyer in the city. He's agreed to review our appeals and advise us on potential legal action against both the county and North Star. Second, Sam continued, we need to make this public. The more attention we bring to what's happening here, the harder it will be for them to continue operating in the shadows. I know a reporter at the state newspaper, offered Diane Miller, who ran the local feed store. She's always looking for stories about corporate overreach in rural communities. Third, we need to protect ourselves and our properties, Sam said, his voice grave. They've already shown they're willing to use intimidation tactics. No one should be alone when dealing with either North Star or the sheriff's department. We need to establish a communication network so we can respond quickly if anyone's targeted. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, with practical plans taking shape. Committees were formed, responsibilities assigned, and a clear strategy developed. By the time people began to disperse, there was a new sense of purpose in the room, a community united against a common threat. As Sam helped Bill pack up the equipment, Sheriff Mills appeared in the doorway, his expression cold as he surveyed the now emptying room. 2 deputies flanked him, their hands resting conspicuously on their holstered weapons. Quite the gathering, Mr. Mercer, Mills said, strolling casually toward the front. Funny, I don't recall seeing a permit application for a public assembly of this size. We don't need a permit to meet at the community center, Sheriff, Sam replied evenly. It's a public building, paid for by our tax dollars. Mills smiled thinly. Actually, County Ordinance 47B requires a permit for any gathering over 30 people in a public facility. Fire code regulations, you understand. This is harassment, and you know it, Bill said, stepping up beside Sam. Mills ignored him, his gaze fixed on Sam. I'm afraid I'll have to issue you a citation, Mr. Mercer, as the apparent organizer of this unauthorized gathering. He pulled out a citation book and began writing. This is ridiculous, Eleanor protested, joining them. We have every right to meet and discuss matters affecting our community. Of course you do, Mrs. Winters, Mills replied without looking up. Just as I have every right, indeed the responsibility, to enforce county ordinances. He tore off the citation and handed it to Sam. $500 fine, payable within 30 days. Consider yourself lucky I'm not pursuing additional penalties. Sam took the citation, careful to keep his expression neutral despite the anger burning in his chest. "Is there anything else, Sheriff?" Mills studied him for a moment, then leaned in slightly. "Just a friendly word of advice, Mercer. You're swimming against the tide here. North Star's plans for this county are going forward, with or without your cooperation. All you're doing is making life difficult for yourself and your neighbors." "Seems to me we're just exercising our rights as citizens," Sam replied. "Last I checked, that was still legal in this country." Mills straightened, adjusting his badge. "Rights come with responsibilities and consequences." He nodded to his deputies, and the three men departed, leaving behind a palpable tension. Once they were gone, Bill let out a long breath. "Well, if we needed any more proof that Mills is in North Star's pocket, I'd say we just got it. $500, Eleanor muttered, looking at the citation in Sam's hand. "That's outrageous. And almost certainly illegal," James added, having witnessed the exchange. "My brother will challenge this. It's a clear case of selective enforcement and intimidation." Sam carefully folded the citation and put it in his pocket. "They're getting nervous. We're organizing, gathering information, preparing to fight back. That's why they're stepping up the pressure." "What's next?" Bill asked. "They've shown they're willing to abuse their authority to shut us down." Sam looked around at the now empty community center, thinking of the determination he'd seen in the faces of his neighbors tonight. "We continue as planned, but we need to be smarter, more careful. No more public meetings like this. We'll gather in smaller groups, on private property, and we need to accelerate our outreach to the media and state officials." As they left the building, Sam noticed a patrol car parked across the street, the deputy inside making no attempt to hide the fact that he was photographing everyone who exited. More intimidation tactics, more evidence of how far the sheriff was willing to go. Back at his farm later that night, Sam sat at his kitchen table, Duke lying at his feet, and reviewed the notes he'd taken during the meeting. The fight was escalating faster than he'd anticipated, and he couldn't shake the feeling that North Star and Sheriff Mills wouldn't limit themselves to citations and harassment for long. His phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. "Hello?" he answered cautiously. "Mr. Mercer?" a female voice replied. "My name is Rachel Martinez. I'm a reporter with the State Tribune. Diane Miller suggested I call you about a situation in Riverdale County involving corporate land acquisition and possible corruption in local law enforcement." Sam straightened in his chair, suddenly alert. "Yes, Ms. Martinez. We definitely have a story you should hear." The picnic table beneath the old maple tree in Sam's backyard had become their unofficial headquarters. 3 days after the community meeting, Rachel Martinez sat across from Sam, Bill, Eleanor, and Marion, her recorder running as she asked pointed questions about the situation in Riverdale County. Duke lounged nearby, occasionally raising his head to track the movements of a squirrel overhead. "So, to summarize," Rachel said, checking her notes, "North Star Development, a subsidiary of Carlisle International, has been pressuring local farmers to sell their land, supposedly for a resort complex. But you believe their actual intention is to mine rare earth minerals discovered in geological surveys 3 years ago." "That's right," Sam confirmed. "And they've enlisted Sheriff Mills to help them apply pressure through selective enforcement, bogus inspections, and intimidation tactics." Rachel tapped her pen against her notepad. "And you say Mills received campaign contributions from a shell company connected to Carlisle?" "Alyssa Thompson traced the money," Marion said. "She's got all the documentation." "I'll need to see that," Rachel noted. "What about these tax reassessments? Do you have evidence they're being applied unfairly?" Bill handed her a folder. "We've mapped every property that received a reassessment notice. They perfectly align with the mineral deposit areas identified in the geological survey." Rachel examined the map, her expression thoughtful. "This is compelling, but North Star will claim it's circumstantial. They'll say the reassessments are legitimate based on changing property values, and that their interest in acquiring the land is unrelated to mineral rights. We know that, Eleanor said firmly, but when you look at the pattern of behavior, the coordinated visits from the sheriff's department, followed immediately by North Star representatives, the targeted harassment of those who refuse to sell, the selective enforcement of county ordinances, the picture becomes clear. Rachel nodded, making additional notes. What about other county officials? The assessor's office, the commissioners, the judge who signed that inspection order for Mrs. Winter's property. Are they all involved? Sam exchanged glances with the others. We don't know yet how deep this goes, but Judge Hawkins and Sheriff Mills have been friends for years, and 2 of the 3 county commissioners campaigned alongside Mills. I need to speak with other affected property owners, Rachel said, and I'll want to interview Sheriff Mills and someone from North Star for their side of the story. Mills won't talk to you once he knows what you're investigating, Bill warned. And North Star will send you to their PR department, who'll feed you the official line about economic development and job creation. Rachel smiled, a determined glint in her eye. This isn't my first story about corporate interests steamrolling rural communities, Mr. Harmon. I know how to ask questions that get past the PR script. As they continued discussing the details of the story, a patrol car rolled slowly past Sam's house, the deputy inside making no attempt to hide his surveillance. Rachel noticed immediately. They're watching you? Pretty much constantly now, Sam confirmed. Ever since the community meeting. They follow Eleanor home from the grocery store, park outside Bill's place at night, drive by Marion's dairy during milking time. It's all about creating a sense that we're being monitored. And it's working, Marion admitted. People are scared. 3 families have already agreed to sell to North Star, just to escape the pressure. Rachel's jaw tightened as she watched the patrol car disappear down the road. This is exactly the kind of story people need to hear. Local corruption, corporate greed, ordinary citizens fighting for their rights. It has all the elements. When do you think you can publish? Eleanor asked. I need a few more days to gather additional statements and documentation, Rachel replied, and I'll have to give Mills and North Star a chance to respond. But I should have something ready by early next week. Will that be soon enough? Bill wondered aloud. North Star's pushing hard, and more people are caving every day. Rachel packed her notebook into her bag. I understand the urgency, but a rushed story with holes will just give them ammunition to discredit the reporting. I promise to work as quickly as I can while being thorough. After Rachel left, the group remained at the picnic table, discussing their next steps. The tax appeal hearings were scheduled for the following week, and James Chen's brother had filed a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office regarding Sheriff Mills' conduct. We need to keep people's spirits up until Rachel's story breaks, Eleanor said. The more of us who stand firm, the stronger our position. Sam nodded, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. I've been thinking about that. What if we organized a community barbecue this weekend? Nothing political on the surface, just neighbors getting together. But it would give us a chance to update everyone on our progress and maintain solidarity. We could host it at my place, Marion offered. The dairy has that big field by the creek, plenty of room for everyone. As they finalized the plans, Sam's phone rang. It was James Chen, his voice tight with urgency. Sam, you need to get over to my orchard right away. The sheriff's department is here with some kind of environmental inspector. They're claiming there's been a report of illegal pesticide use. Another bogus inspection, Sam muttered. We'll be right there. 20 minutes later, Sam pulled into the Chen family orchard, followed closely by Bill's truck. 2 sheriff's department vehicles were parked near the main barn, and a man in a hazmat suit was taking samples from one of the sprinkler systems while deputies kept James at a distance. What's going on here? Sam asked, approaching the scene with Bill at his side. The lead deputy, the same crew-cut officer who had conducted the inspection at Eleanor's property, turned with a scowl. Official county business, Mr. Mercer. Please return to your vehicle. I'm here at Mr. Chen's request, Sam replied calmly. As his witness. We've received reports of illegal chemical use at this facility, the deputy stated. The environmental inspector needs to collect samples without interference. James, who ran one of the few certified organic orchards in the state, looked both furious and bewildered. This is absurd. We haven't used synthetic pesticides in 15 years. We're fully certified organic, with documentation and regular inspections to prove it. The inspector straightened up, his face obscured by his protective mask. I'll be the judge of what's being used here, sir. Our equipment has detected traces of chlorpyrifos, a restricted pesticide. That's impossible, James protested. We don't even have that chemical on the property. Sam studied the hazmat-suited figure, noticing something odd about his equipment and procedures. Having worked with legitimate agricultural inspectors many times over the years, something didn't add up. May I see your credentials? Sam asked the inspector. The man hesitated, glancing at the deputy. That won't be necessary, the deputy cut in. He's operating under county authority. Actually, environmental inspectors are required by law to present their credentials when requested, Bill said, stepping forward. Section 7 of the State Agricultural Code. I served on the County Agricultural Board for 12 years, so I'm quite familiar with the regulations. The inspector and deputy exchanged another glance, and Sam's suspicions deepened. In fact, Bill continued, pulling out his phone, I'm going to call the State Department of Environmental Protection right now to verify that they've authorized this inspection. That won't be, the deputy began, but Bill was already dialing. Hello, this is William Harmon from Riverdale County, Bill said clearly. I need to verify an environmental inspection currently being conducted at Chen Family Orchards. He listened for a moment, then his eyebrows rose. I see. Thank you. Bill lowered the phone, his expression hard. The DEP has no record of any inspection scheduled for this property, or any complaint about pesticide use in Riverdale County in the past month. The inspector quickly packed his equipment, avoiding eye contact with everyone. This inspection is concluded, the deputy announced stiffly. We'll be filing our report with the appropriate authorities. And we'll be filing a complaint about fraudulent inspection practices, James replied, his voice steady despite his obvious anger. Including taking photographs of your badge numbers and vehicle registrations. The deputies and the fake inspector departed quickly, leaving James, Sam, and Bill standing in the orchard, watching the dust settle behind their vehicles. They're getting desperate, Sam observed. And sloppy. And dangerous, Bill added. If they're willing to fabricate environmental violations, what else are they willing to do? James looked around his orchard, generations of his family's work stretching out in neat rows of apple and peach trees. If they think this will make me sell, they've seriously misjudged the situation. I'm more determined than ever to fight back. Sam clapped him on the shoulder. That's the spirit. And now we have more evidence for Rachel's story and for the Attorney General's investigation. As they walked back toward the barn, Sam couldn't help but wonder what Sheriff Mills and North Star would try next. They were escalating their tactics, becoming more brazen in their attempts to pressure the holdout farmers. And with Rachel's story still days away from publication, the situation was likely to get worse before it got better. We need to warn everyone, Sam said. They're targeting us one by one, trying to find our weak points. No one should face these people alone. The three men paused at the edge of the orchard, looking out over the patchwork of farms that made up their community, a landscape of fields, pastures, and family homes that represented generations of hard work and dedication to the land. Whatever it takes, James said quietly. We stand together. The community barbecue at Marion's Dairy Farm was in full swing by mid-afternoon on Saturday. Under a cloudless blue sky, nearly 100 people had gathered, Farmers, local business owners, and their families, all sharing food, conversation, and a sense of collective purpose that had been strengthened by the events of the past week. Sam stood by the grill, flipping burgers alongside Bill Harmon. From this vantage point, he could observe the entire gathering, children playing near the creek, teenagers helping set up volleyball nets, adults clustered in small groups engaged in serious discussion. Duke roamed the periphery, happily accepting scraps and pats from the attendees. "Better turnout than I expected," Bill remarked, sliding another row of burgers onto a waiting platter. Sam nodded. "Word's spreading. People understand what's at stake now." Across the field, Eleanor was deep in conversation with several elderly farmers, her hands moving animatedly as she spoke. James Chen and his family were organizing games for the children, while Marion shuttled between the food tables, making sure everyone had plenty to eat. "Have you heard from Rachel?" Bill asked, lowering his voice despite the ambient noise of the gathering. "She called this morning," Sam replied. "She's making good progress on the story. Interviewed 2 former county employees who confirmed that Mills pressured the assessor's office to fast-track our reassessments." Bill whistled softly. "That's solid evidence of corruption." She's also tracked down similar cases in other states where North Star operated. Same pattern. They target rural communities, use local officials to pressure landowners, then reveal their true plans once they've secured the properties. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Miguel Reyes, who worked in the county clerk's office and had been a valuable source of inside information. "Thought you should know," Miguel said quietly, accepting a burger from Bill. "Mills called an emergency meeting with the county commissioners yesterday afternoon. Closed session, no minutes recorded." Sam frowned. "Any idea what it was about?" Miguel glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard. "Nothing official, but my supervisor was asked to pull all the property records for the eastern part of the county beforehand, and Judge Hawkins was there too." "That doesn't sound good," Bill muttered. "There's more," Miguel continued. "This morning I overheard 2 deputies talking about some kind of operation planned for early next week. Something about securing the area and health and safety enforcement." Sam and Bill exchanged concerned looks. "Sounds like they're planning something big," Sam said. "We need to warn everyone to be on alert." As Miguel moved on to join another group, Sam noticed a truck pulling into the farm's entrance. It was Victor Rawlings' black SUV, accompanied by 2 sheriff's department vehicles. "Trouble," Sam murmured to Bill, nodding toward the approaching vehicles. Word spread quickly through the gathering. Parents called their children back from the creek, conversations halted mid-sentence, and a tense silence fell over the crowd as Sheriff Mills emerged from one of the patrol cars, adjusting his hat against the bright sunlight. Marion Thompson strode forward to meet the unwelcome visitors, her back straight and her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet gathering. "This is private property, Sheriff. Do you have a warrant?" Mills smiled thinly. "No warrant needed, Mrs. Thompson. We're responding to reports of a large, unpermitted gathering creating a public disturbance." "There's no disturbance here," Marion replied firmly. "Just neighbors enjoying a peaceful Saturday afternoon barbecue." Victor Rawlings stepped forward, his expensive suit looking out of place against the backdrop of the rural gathering. "Mrs. Thompson, while I hate to interrupt your festivities, I must point out that gatherings of this size require proper sanitation facilities according to county health codes. I don't see any portable restrooms, which constitutes a violation." Sam moved to stand beside Marion, aware that everyone was watching the confrontation. "We're using the facilities in Marion's home and the dairy's employee restrooms," he said calmly, "all of which are up to code and regularly inspected." "For a dairy operation," Rawlings countered smoothly. "Not for a public event with—" He made a show of surveying the crowd. At least 75 attendees. "This isn't a public event," Bill called out, joining Sam and Marion. "It's a private gathering of friends on private property." Sheriff Mills stepped closer, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. "Mr. Harmon, interfering with a county official in the performance of his duties is an offense. I suggest you step back." The tension in the air was palpable. Children clung to their parents' legs. Teenagers watched with wide eyes. And the adults formed a protective semicircle, instinctively moving to shield the most vulnerable members of their community. Eleanor pushed through the crowd to the front, her small frame somehow commanding as she faced the sheriff. "Leland Mills," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "I've known you since you were a boy stealing apples from my orchard. Your father would be ashamed to see you now, bullying the very people you swore to protect." A flicker of something, perhaps shame, perhaps just annoyance, crossed Mills's face. "Mrs. Winters, this isn't personal. It's about enforcing county regulations." "It became personal," Eleanor retorted, "when you decided to help North Star drive us off our land." Victor Rawlings cleared his throat. "I assure you, Mrs. Winters, North Star development has nothing to do with the sheriff's enforcement of local ordinances. We're simply interested in acquiring properties for a project that will benefit the entire community." "A mining operation," Sam said bluntly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Not a resort. You're after the rare earth minerals under our farms, and you've enlisted the sheriff to help you get them as cheaply as possible." Rawlings' carefully maintained composure slipped for just a moment, his eyes narrowing at Sam's direct accusation. "That's a ridiculous claim, Mr. Mercer. North Star is a development company, not a mining operation." "North Star is a subsidiary of Carlyle International," Marion countered, "which owns Geocore Mining. We've done our research, Mr. Rawlings." Murmurs spread through the crowd as those who hadn't been at the community meeting absorbed this information. Sheriff Mills glanced at Rawlings, then back at the gathered farmers, clearly assessing the situation. "Regardless of North Star's plans," Mills said finally, "this gathering is in violation of county health ordinances. I'm issuing Mrs. Thompson a citation, and I'm instructing everyone to disperse within the next 30 minutes. He pulled out his citation book and began writing, seemingly oblivious to the growing anger of the crowd. Sam could feel the tension building, could see some of the younger men shifting restlessly, their patience wearing thin. "Let's stay calm," Sam said loudly, turning to address the gathering. "We'll comply with the sheriff's order, for now. But remember what's happening here today. Remember how our local law enforcement is being used to disrupt a peaceful community event." Mills tore off the citation and handed it to Marion, who took it with tight-lipped dignity. 30 minutes, he repeated, then turned back toward his patrol car. As the sheriff, his deputies, and Rawlings departed, the collective tension began to dissipate, replaced by a mixture of anger, disappointment, and resolve. Families started packing up their food and belongings, the children subdued, the adults speaking in hushed, angry tones. "I'm sorry, everyone," Marion called out, her voice steady despite the citation clutched in her hand. "It seems our barbecue has been cut short." "Don't apologize," James Chen replied, loud enough for all to hear. "This is exactly why we need to stand together. Today it's a citation for a barbecue. Tomorrow it could be any of us, for any reason they choose to invent." Sam stepped up onto a picnic table, raising his voice to address the dispersing crowd. "Before we leave, I want to thank everyone for coming today, and I want you all to know that we're making progress. The truth about what's happening in Riverdale County is going to come out soon, and when it does, Sheriff Mills and North Star will have to answer for their actions." He paused, meeting the eyes of neighbors he'd known all his life. "In the meantime, stay vigilant, document everything, and remember, none of us stands alone in this fight." As the gathering broke up, Eleanor approached Sam, her expression troubled. "They're getting bolder, Sam. Coming here like this, in front of everyone, they're not even trying to hide what they're doing anymore." Sam nodded grimly. "They're feeling the pressure. Rachel's investigation, the Attorney General's inquiry, our tax appeals. We're pushing back from multiple directions and they don't like it. Which makes them more dangerous, Bill added, joining them. Miguel's warning about an operation next week has me worried. What are they planning? Whatever it is, Sam said, we need to be ready. Let's gather everyone who can make it at my place tonight. We need to prepare for whatever they throw at us next. As Sam helped load the remaining food and equipment into trucks and cars, he couldn't shake a growing sense of foreboding. Sheriff Mills and North Star had escalated from subtle pressure to open intimidation, and Sam suspected they were just getting started. The real battle was yet to come. Monday morning arrived with an unusual stillness that set Sam's nerves on edge. He'd risen before dawn as always, but today the familiar routine of farm chores felt different, weighted with anticipation. Miguel's warning about the sheriff's planned operation had circulated through their network, putting everyone on high alert. After feeding the livestock and checking the irrigation systems, Sam stood on his porch, cup of coffee in hand, surveying his property in the soft morning light. Duke sat attentively at his feet, perhaps sensing his master's unease. The emergency meeting at his farm Saturday night had drawn a smaller but more dedicated group, those who were fully committed to seeing this fight through to the end. They'd developed contingency plans, assigned lookouts throughout the area, and established a phone tree for rapid communication if Mills made his move. Sam's cell phone rang, breaking the morning quiet. It was Bill. They're moving, he said without preamble. Just got a call from Miguel. Mills deployed every deputy in the department about 20 minutes ago. Multiple vehicles heading east. Sam's grip tightened on his mug. Toward our properties? Looks that way. And Sam, they've got county vehicles with them. Maintenance trucks, some kind of heavy equipment. Alert the others, Sam instructed. I'll head to the ridge. It's got the best view of the approach roads. After hanging up, Sam quickly gathered his binoculars and a handheld radio from the emergency kit they'd prepared. He whistled for Duke, and together they headed for his truck. The ridge that marked the western boundary of Sam's property rose about 100 feet above the surrounding farmland, offering a panoramic view of the area where most of the holdout farms were located. Sam parked at the base and made the short climb to the summit, Duke bounding ahead on the familiar trail. From this vantage point, he could see Eleanor's farm directly to the east, Marion's dairy operation to the northeast, and the Chen family orchard beyond that. The morning sun illuminated the patchwork of fields, pastures, and woodlots that made up their community, a landscape shaped by generations of careful stewardship. It didn't take long to spot what he was looking for. A convoy of vehicles was moving along the county road that connected their properties, sheriff's department SUVs, maintenance trucks, and what appeared to be several pieces of construction equipment on flatbed trailers. They were heading straight for Eleanor's farm. Sam raised his radio. They're heading to Eleanor's, he reported. At least 8 vehicles, including heavy equipment. ETA 5 minutes. Acknowledgments crackled back from Bill, James, and Marion. They were all watching, all ready to respond. Sam scrambled back down the ridge and jumped into his truck. Eleanor was the most vulnerable target, a widow living alone, her property directly in the path of the convoy. He had promised to stand with her if trouble came, and now it was arriving in force. By the time Sam pulled into Eleanor's driveway, the convoy had already arrived. 4 sheriff's department vehicles were parked in a semicircle around the front yard, deputies positioned strategically around the property. Behind them, the maintenance trucks and equipment waited on the road, engines idling. Eleanor stood on her front porch, ramrod straight despite her age, facing Sheriff Mills and 2 deputies who had approached her house. Sam parked and quickly made his way to her side, Duke staying close to his heels. "What's going on here, Sheriff?" Sam asked as he climbed the porch steps to stand beside Eleanor. Mills turned, unsurprised by Sam's arrival. "County business, Mr. Mercer. The Public Works Department is conducting necessary infrastructure maintenance along this road. which requires temporary access to portions of Mrs. Winters' property. What kind of maintenance requires that much equipment? Sam nodded toward the idling convoy. Drainage work, Mills replied smoothly. Recent surveys have identified potential flooding hazards that need immediate attention. Eleanor's expression was skeptical. Flooding hazards? On land that hasn't flooded in the 70 years I've lived here? Climate change, Mrs. Winters, said a man in a hard hat who had joined them on the porch. He introduced himself as Robert Taylor, Director of County Public Works. Rainfall patterns are shifting, creating new vulnerabilities in our infrastructure. Sam studied Taylor carefully. The man avoided direct eye contact, his posture tense. Either he was lying or he was uncomfortable with his role in whatever was happening. Do you have an easement agreement for this work? Sam asked, directing the question to Taylor rather than Mills. Taylor hesitated, glancing at the sheriff. We're operating under emergency provisions of the county code, which allows for immediate action when public safety is at risk. And what specific work are you planning to do today? Eleanor asked, her voice steady. Before Taylor could answer, a familiar black SUV pulled up behind the convoy. Victor Rawlings emerged, straightening his tie as he approached the house. Quite the coincidence, Sam remarked dryly. North Star just happens to be in the neighborhood during this emergency maintenance. Mills ignored the comment, but his jaw tightened noticeably. Mr. Taylor, please explain the scope of today's work to Mrs. Winters. Taylor cleared his throat. We need to install a drainage culvert along the eastern boundary of your property, ma'am. It will require excavation approximately 20 feet in from the road, running the length of your land. Sam's eyes narrowed as he calculated the implications. That would cut directly through Eleanor's main irrigation line and disrupt access to her eastern fields. A temporary inconvenience, Taylor acknowledged. The county will compensate for any disruption, of course. This is absurd, Eleanor said, her patience visibly wearing thin. There's no flooding issue here. This is just another tactic to pressure me into selling to North Star. Sheriff Mills stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. Mrs. Winters, I understand your frustration, but the county has the legal authority to proceed with necessary infrastructure work. You can either cooperate or what, Sheriff? Came a new voice. Bill Harmon was walking up the driveway, followed closely by James Chen and Marion Thompson. Behind them, at least 20 other community members were approaching on foot, having parked their vehicles along the road. Mills turned, clearly surprised by the number of people arriving. This is an official county operation. Civilians need to keep their distance. We're here as witnesses, Marion announced clearly, to ensure that everything is done according to proper procedures. By now, Eleanor's front yard had become crowded with community members, all watching the confrontation with resolute expressions. Several had phones out, recording the scene. Victor Rawlings, who had been observing from a distance, now approached Mills and spoke quietly in his ear. The sheriff's expression darkened as he listened. Then he turned back to the growing crowd. This area is now restricted, he announced. Anyone not directly involved in the county operation needs to leave immediately, or face arrest for obstruction. No one moved. The silence stretched taut between the two groups, the community members standing their ground, the deputies and county workers growing visibly uncomfortable with the standoff. Sheriff Mills, called a familiar female voice from the back of the crowd. Rachel Martinez pushed her way forward, press credentials visible around her neck, a photographer following close behind. Rachel Martinez, State Tribune. Can you explain why the county is conducting emergency drainage work on private property without prior notification to the owner? Mills's expression froze, then reset into a professional mask. Ms. Martinez, this is a routine infrastructure project addressing potential safety concerns. Really? Rachel consulted her notebook. Because I've reviewed county records for the past decade, and there's no history of flooding issues in this area. In fact, the most recent hydrological survey classified this entire section of the county as having minimal flood risk. She turned to Taylor. Mr. Taylor, when did your department identify this emergency situation, and what specific data are you using to justify the work? Taylor looked to Mills for guidance, clearly unprepared for such direct questioning. And Sheriff, Rachel continued, not waiting for a response, can you explain why Victor Rawlings from North Star Development is present at what you claim is a routine county operation? The photographer moved around the scene, capturing images of the confrontation, the heavy equipment, and the gathered community members. Each camera click seemed to increase the tension. No comment at this time, Mills said tightly. He turned to Taylor and the deputies. Let's postpone today's work until the proper documentation is in order. The retreat was thinly disguised, but it was still a retreat. As the county workers returned to their vehicles and the deputies backed away from the property, a cautious sense of triumph spread through the crowd. Victor Rawlings remained, watching with cold calculation as the convoy prepared to leave. His gaze found Sam in the crowd, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked in mutual recognition of the escalating stakes. This isn't over, Mercer, Rawlings said quietly as he passed by on his way back to his SUV. Not by a long shot. Counting on it, Sam replied evenly. As the last vehicle pulled away, leaving only dust and tension in its wake, the community members gathered around Eleanor, offering support and congratulations on standing her ground. Rachel approached Sam, her expression serious despite the apparent victory. They'll be back, she said, keeping her voice low, and next time they'll be better prepared. Sam nodded. I know, but so will we. My editor has approved the story, Rachel informed him. It runs tomorrow, front page. Mills and North Star won't know what hit them. For the first time in weeks, Sam felt a genuine sense of hope. The truth was about to come to light, and once it did, Sheriff Mills and North Star would find themselves fighting on very different terrain. But as he looked around at his neighbors, their faces showing relief, but also wariness, Sam knew that the most dangerous phase of the battle might still lie ahead. Cornered adversaries were often the most desperate, and both Mills and North Star had too much at stake to give up easily. The confrontation had been averted today, but the war for Riverdale County's future was far from over. The headline of the State Tribune blazed across the front page. Corruption in Riverdale. Sheriff, development company accused of forcing farmers off their land. Beneath it, Rachel Martinez's meticulously researched article laid out the entire scheme. The campaign contributions from Carlisle International's shell company to Sheriff Mills, the coordinated pressure tactics against local farmers, the real purpose behind North Star's land acquisition, and the geological surveys showing valuable mineral deposits. Sam spread the newspaper on his kitchen table, reading through the article for the third time that morning. Rachel had done an outstanding job, backing every claim with documentation and quotations from multiple sources. The piece was comprehensive, damning, and impossible to dismiss as mere rumor or speculation. His phone had been ringing constantly since dawn, as neighbors and supporters called to discuss the bombshell story. The general mood was one of cautious optimism. Finally, the truth was out in the open, and surely now state authorities would step in to address the corruption. Bill arrived just after 9, clutching his own copy of the paper, his face flushed with excitement. Have you seen the reaction online? The story's gone viral. State news channels are picking it up, and there's talk that the governor's office is monitoring the situation. Any word from the sheriff's department? Sam asked, pouring coffee for his friend. Bill shook his head. Complete silence. Miguel says the office is in lockdown, no one going in or out except Mills and his inner circle. But he did hear that the state attorney general's office called this morning, requesting documents. Sam nodded thoughtfully. And North Star? Their PR department issued a bland statement denying any wrongdoing and claiming the article contains multiple inaccuracies and defamatory statements. Standard corporate response. Bill took a seat at the table. But here's something interesting. Alyssa found out that Carlisle International's stock took a hit when the markets opened this morning. They're clearly worried about the publicity. This was good news, but Sam remained cautious. Mills and North Star won't just roll over because of one newspaper article, no matter how damaging. They've invested too much in this scheme to walk away now. So what's our next move? Bill asked. We keep pushing, Sam replied. The tax appeal hearings are tomorrow. We all need to show up in force with our documentation ready. And we keep feeding information to Rachel for follow-up stories. As they discussed strategy, Sam's phone rang again. It was Eleanor, her voice tight with urgency. Sam, there's a county road crew setting up at the edge of my property. They've got concrete barriers and road closed signs. They're blocking access to my driveway. Sam exchanged a concerned glance with Bill. Any sheriff's deputies with them? Not that I can see, Eleanor replied. Just county workers. They claim they're repairing a culvert, but there's nothing wrong with the culvert. It's just another harassment tactic. We'll be right there, Sam assured her. And Eleanor, take pictures of everything they're doing. After hanging up, Sam quickly explained the situation to Bill. They're changing tactics, using county departments instead of the sheriff's office to apply pressure, probably trying to create distance between Mills and the harassment now that the story is public. Smart, Bill acknowledged grimly. Makes it harder to prove a direct connection to Mills or North Star. By the time they arrived at Eleanor's farm, the situation had escalated. The road crew had indeed placed concrete barriers that made it nearly impossible to access her driveway, and they were now digging up the perfectly functional culvert that ran under the road adjacent to her property. Eleanor stood at the edge of her driveway, documenting the scene with her phone, while arguing with a supervisor who looked increasingly uncomfortable with the confrontation. Ma'am, I'm just following orders, the supervisor was saying as Sam and Bill approached. The work order says this culvert needs replacement due to structural concerns. That culvert was inspected just last year, Eleanor countered. There's nothing wrong with it. The supervisor avoided her gaze. I don't make the decisions, I just carry out the work orders. Who issued the order? Sam asked, joining them. The man hesitated. County Roads Department. Under whose authority? Bill pressed. Look, I'm just doing my job, the supervisor said, clearly wanting to extricate himself from the conversation. If you have complaints, take them up with the department. As they continued to document the situation and press for answers, more community members began to arrive, alerted through their communication network. Within an hour, a small crowd had gathered, many holding copies of the morning's newspaper and asking pointed questions about the timing of the suddenly urgent roadwork. The road crew, visibly uncomfortable with the scrutiny, worked slowly and without enthusiasm. It was clear to everyone that this was not legitimate infrastructure maintenance, but another form of harassment. Around noon, a state police cruiser pulled up beside the county trucks. A trim, middle-aged officer emerged and surveyed the scene with professional detachment before approaching Eleanor, Sam, and Bill. Mrs. Winters? He asked, addressing Eleanor directly. I'm Lieutenant Wallace, State Police. I understand there's a dispute about road work on your property. Eleanor quickly explained the situation, showing the lieutenant photos she'd taken of the perfectly functional culvert before the crew had begun removing it, and pointing out how the barriers had been positioned to specifically block access to her farm. Lieutenant Wallace listened attentively, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Eleanor finished, he nodded and turned to the road crew supervisor. Sir, I'd like to see the work order for this project, please. The supervisor reluctantly produced a clipboard with the paperwork. Lieutenant Wallace reviewed it carefully, his expression revealing nothing. Interesting, he said finally. This order was issued yesterday afternoon, after the close of normal business hours, and marked as emergency maintenance. Yet there's no documentation of what constitutes the emergency. He handed the clipboard back to the supervisor. I'm going to need to see identification from everyone on this crew, and I'll need contact information for your direct supervisor. The supervisor's face paled. Are we in some kind of trouble, sir? That depends, Lieutenant Wallace replied evenly. The State Attorney General's office has opened an investigation into allegations of corruption and abuse of power in Riverdale County. As part of that investigation, we're looking into unusual or potentially retaliatory actions by county officials. This announcement sent a ripple of excitement through the gathered crowd. The state was already responding to Rachel's article, and far more quickly than anyone had anticipated. While Lieutenant Wallace continued his inquiry with the road crew, Sam pulled Bill and Eleanor aside. This is a good sign, he said quietly. But it also means Mills and North Star are going to feel cornered. We need to be extra vigilant now. They might try something more desperate. Eleanor nodded gravely. I'll stay with Marion tonight. Better not to be alone. Good idea, Sam agreed. And we should check on James and the others, make sure everyone's prepared for possible retaliation. By mid-afternoon, the state police had documented the situation thoroughly, and Lieutenant Wallace had instructed the road crew to remove the barriers blocking Eleanor's driveway. The crew would continue replacing the culvert, since they had already removed the old one, but Wallace made it clear that any unnecessary disruption to local residents would be noted in his report to the Attorney General's office. As the lieutenant prepared to leave, he approached Sam. Mr. Mercer, isn't it? The article mentioned you've been coordinating the community response to these incidents. Sam nodded cautiously, unsure whether this was an official inquiry. Off the record, Wallace said, lowering his voice, this investigation is being taken very seriously at the state level. The Attorney General has assigned a special prosecutor, and they're moving quickly. But these cases can be complex, and in the meantime, we're still vulnerable, Sam finished for him. Wallace nodded. Just be careful. Sheriff Mills is in a precarious position right now, and that makes him unpredictable. If you witness any further harassment or intimidation, call the state police directly. Here's my card with my direct line. After the lieutenant departed, the community members gradually dispersed as well, heading home with renewed hope, but also heightened vigilance. The state's involvement was encouraging, but as Sam had warned, it also raised the stakes for Mills and North Star. As Sam drove back to his farm, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the fields, he couldn't shake a feeling of unease. They had won an important battle today, but the war was far from over. And sometimes the most dangerous moment in any conflict was when victory began to seem possible, when the desperate opponent had nothing left to lose. The tax appeal hearings were scheduled for 10 o'clock Wednesday morning at the County Administration Building. Sam arrived early, finding the parking lot already filling with familiar vehicles, his neighbors and fellow appellants gathering for what they hoped would be a turning point in their fight against the fraudulent reassessments. Inside the building's main hallway, the atmosphere was charged with nervous energy. Nearly 30 farmers and property owners stood in small groups, reviewing documents and sharing updates on the latest developments. The State Attorney General's investigation had dominated local news since Rachel's article broke, with new details emerging hourly about the connections between Sheriff Mills, North Star Development, and county officials. Sam spotted Eleanor deep in conversation with James Chen and his brother, the lawyer who had helped prepare their appeals. He made his way through the crowd to join them. "Morning," he greeted them. "Any word on who's hearing the appeals today?" James shook his head. Judge Hawkins was originally scheduled, but there's a rumor he's recused himself due to his connection to Mills. They're bringing in a judge from the neighboring county instead. "That's promising," Sam remarked. Judge Hawkins's impartiality had been one of their primary concerns, given his long-standing friendship with the sheriff. Eleanor looked tired but determined, clutching a folder of documentation. I just hope they actually listen to the evidence. These reassessments were clearly targeted and unjustified. They'll listen, James's brother David assured her. The state's watching now. No one wants to be caught perpetuating a scheme that's under investigation by the Attorney General. At precisely 10 o'clock, the doors to the hearing room opened and a court officer emerged. "If I could have everyone's attention," he announced. "Due to the large number of appeals being heard today, we've moved the proceedings to the main courtroom. Please follow me." The group filed through the building to the county courthouse, where the largest courtroom was indeed prepared for the hearings. At the front, an unfamiliar judge, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, was already seated, reviewing documents. "All rise," the bailiff called as they entered. "The Honorable Judge Evelyn Chambers presiding in the matter of property tax reassessment appeals." Once everyone was seated, Judge Chambers addressed the room. "Good morning. I understand we have 28 separate appeals to be heard today, all concerning similar issues of property tax reassessment in the eastern portion of Riverdale County. In the interest of efficiency, I'm going to hear evidence on the methodology of these reassessments first, then consider individual cases as needed." She nodded to the county assessor, a nervous-looking man named Harold Finch, who approached the bench with visible reluctance. "Mr. Finch, please explain the criteria and procedures used to determine which properties were reassessed and how their new values were calculated." For the next hour, the hearing proceeded with methodical precision. Judge Chambers asked pointed questions about the timing of the reassessments, the selection criteria, and the market comparisons used to justify the increased valuations. Finch struggled to provide coherent answers, frequently contradicting himself and looking increasingly uncomfortable. When it was the appellant's turn to present their evidence, David Chen approached the bench with confidence, presenting maps that showed the clear correlation between reassessed properties and the mineral deposits identified in the geological survey. He also introduced documentation of similar market value properties in the county that had not been reassessed, demonstrating the selective nature of the process. Throughout the presentation, Judge Chambers remained attentive and engaged, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but offering no hint of her leanings. The county's attorney made a half-hearted attempt to defend the reassessments, but his arguments were undermined by Finch's earlier testimony. Just as David was concluding his presentation, the courtroom doors burst open. Sheriff Mills strode in, flanked by 4 deputies, his expression grim and determined. Behind them came Victor Rawlings and 2 men in expensive suits whom Sam didn't recognize. The entire room fell silent as Mills approached the bench, ignoring Judge Chambers' look of displeasure at the interruption. "Your Honor," Mills began without preamble, "I need to request an immediate adjournment of these proceedings." Judge Chambers regarded him coldly. "Sheriff Mills, you are interrupting a judicial hearing. Unless you have a court order or an immediate public safety concern, you have no authority to request anything in my courtroom." Mills stood his ground. "Your Honor, I have information relevant to these proceedings. Several of the appellants here today are persons of interest in an ongoing criminal investigation." A murmur of shock and anger rippled through the room. Sam felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. This was the desperate move they had feared, Mills attempting to intimidate them with false criminal allegations. "What investigation would that be, Sheriff?" Judge Chambers asked, her voice deceptively calm. "Conspiracy to obstruct county operations, tampering with public infrastructure, and criminal trespass," Mills replied. "We have evidence that several individuals present today, including Samuel Mercer, Eleanor Winters, and William Harmon, have actively interfered with county workers performing essential maintenance and safety functions." Sam started to rise, fury building in his chest, but David Chen put a restraining hand on his arm and shook his head slightly. This wasn't the time to react emotionally. Judge Chambers removed her glasses, fixing Mills with a penetrating stare. "Sheriff, Are you telling me that you wish to arrest these individuals during a tax appeal hearing in my courtroom? Mills hesitated, perhaps sensing that his gambit wasn't having the intended effect. I'm merely informing the court of an active investigation that may impact these proceedings. I see, Judge Chambers said. And when were these alleged crimes reported? When did your investigation begin? The incidents have occurred over the past several weeks, Mills answered, his confidence visibly wavering under the judge's scrutiny. Interesting timing, Judge Chambers observed. Sheriff, are you aware that I received a call from the State Attorney General's office this morning regarding the investigation into your department's conduct and its connections to North Star Development? Mills paled slightly, but maintained his composure. I'm aware of the inquiry, Your Honor, but it has no bearing on legitimate law enforcement activities. Judge Chambers replaced her glasses and picked up a document from her bench. I have here an emergency injunction issued by the State Superior Court this morning, prohibiting the Riverdale County Sheriff's Department from taking any action against the property owners involved in these appeals until the state's investigation is complete. She held up the paper. Would you like to see it, Sheriff? The courtroom erupted in whispers as Mills stared at the injunction in disbelief. Victor Rawlings leaned forward to whisper urgently in the ear of one of the suited men, whose expression darkened as he listened. Furthermore, Judge Chambers continued, her voice cutting through the murmurs, based on the evidence presented today regarding these reassessments, I am issuing an immediate stay on all tax increases for the properties in question, pending a complete review by an independent assessor appointed by the state. She gavelled for silence as excited conversation broke out among the appellants. This hearing is adjourned until further notice. Sheriff Mills, I suggest you and your deputies return to your regular duties, which do not include interfering with judicial proceedings. Mills stood frozen for a moment, then turned abruptly and stalked from the courtroom, his deputies following in confused silence. Rawlings and his companions lingered briefly, surveying the room with cold calculation, before they too departed. As the tension in the room dissolved into relieved conversation and celebration, Sam found himself shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline. They had won this round decisively, but Mills's desperate attempt to intimidate them confirmed Sam's fears. The sheriff was becoming more dangerous as his options narrowed. Don't look so worried, Eleanor said, appearing at his side. This is a victory, Sam. It is, he agreed, managing a smile. But Mills isn't done yet. That performance wasn't just about disrupting the hearing, it was a message. He's telling us he's still willing to use his badge to come after us personally. Bill joined them, his expression mirroring Sam's concern. We need to be careful leaving here. No one should go home alone. I've already thought of that, David Chen said, approaching their group. I've arranged for some colleagues from my law firm to escort people home if needed. And I've informed Lieutenant Wallace of the state police about Mills's behavior today. Sam nodded gratefully, but couldn't shake his unease. The confrontation in the courtroom had been public, witnessed by dozens of people. What worried him more was what Mills might do when there weren't witnesses present. As they made their way out of the courthouse, Sam noticed Rachel Martinez standing near the entrance, taking notes as she interviewed some of the appellants about the hearing. Sam, she called, breaking away to approach him. Care to comment on today's ruling? It's a step in the right direction, he replied cautiously. But this fight is far from over. Rachel lowered her voice, her expression serious. You should know. My sources tell me Carlyle International is sending a crisis management team to deal with the situation. They're worried about the publicity and the potential impact on their stock value. Is that good news or bad? Sam asked. Both, Rachel said. They might decide to cut their losses and abandon the project. Or they might double down and try to steamroll the opposition before more damage is done to their reputation. Sam nodded, understanding the implications. Thanks for the heads up. And Rachel, Be careful with your reporting. You've made some powerful enemies. Goes with the territory, she replied with a grim smile, but I appreciate the concern. As Sam headed for his truck, he found himself scanning the parking lot, suddenly aware of how exposed they all were. The county administration building sat on the outskirts of town, surrounded by open fields with few witnesses if something were to happen. Nothing seemed amiss, but the knot of unease in his stomach remained. Something told him that Sheriff Mills wasn't going to accept today's defeat quietly, and the next confrontation might not take place in the safety of a courtroom. The night after the tax hearing victory, Sam couldn't sleep. A heavy summer storm had rolled in, thunder rumbling in the distance as rain lashed against his farmhouse windows. Duke lay alert at the foot of the bed, ears perked at every sound. Shortly after midnight, Sam's phone rang. It was Eleanor, her voice tight with fear. "Sam, there's someone outside my house. I can see flashlights moving around the barn." Sam was instantly alert. "Have you called the state police?" "I tried Lieutenant Wallace's number, but it went to voicemail. The regular emergency line said they'd send someone, but it could take 30 minutes for a state trooper to get here." "I'm on my way," Sam said, already pulling on his boots. "Call Bill and Marion. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Stay inside. Doors locked." The rain was coming down in sheets as Sam drove toward Eleanor's farm, windshield wipers struggling to maintain visibility. Duke sat tensely in the passenger seat, sensing his master's urgency. As Sam approached Eleanor's property, he killed his headlights and slowed, watching for signs of intruders. Through the curtain of rain, he could make out several vehicles parked on the access road that ran behind her barn. County sheriff's SUVs, their markings visible even in the darkness. Sam parked his truck out of sight behind a stand of trees and called Eleanor. "I'm here," he said quietly. "It's the sheriff's department. At least 3 vehicles that I can see. Stay put and keep the doors locked. Bill and the others are on their way." "Sam, be careful," Eleanor urged. "After today, Mills is desperate. There's no telling what he might do." Sam slipped his phone into his pocket and whistled softly to Duke. Together they made their way through the rain-soaked fields, staying low and using the storm as cover. As they drew closer to the barn, Sam could hear voices, Sheriff Mills and several deputies. Through the open barn door, he could see flashlight beams moving inside. They appeared to be searching for something. "Keep looking," Mills was saying, his voice barely audible over the rain. "It has to be here somewhere. That old woman is hiding something, I know it." Sam crept closer, Duke padding silently beside him. From his new position, he could see Mills directing 3 deputies as they ransacked Eleanor's barn, pulling apart hay bales and emptying storage containers. "Sheriff," one of the deputies called out, sounding uncertain. "I'm not sure we should be doing this without a warrant. After that injunction today." "The injunction only prevents us from arresting them," Mills cut in sharply. "It doesn't stop us from conducting an investigation. And I have probable cause to believe there are illegal substances stored on this property." "What probable cause?" another deputy asked. Mills turned on him, face twisted with anger. "Are you questioning me, Jenkins? Because I can find another deputy who understands the chain of command." The deputy backed down immediately, returning to his search. Sam had seen and heard enough. He retreated silently, circling around to approach from the driveway. As he neared the front of the property, he saw Bill's truck arriving, followed closely by James Chen's car and several other vehicles. Their headlights illuminated the sheriff's SUVs parked behind the barn, exposing the illegal search to potential witnesses. Sam met the group at Eleanor's front porch, quickly explaining what he'd observed. Eleanor joined them, visibly shaken but resolute. "They're fabricating evidence," Sam concluded, "trying to plant something they can discover to justify an arrest despite the injunction." "We need to document this," James said, pulling out his phone, "and call Lieutenant Wallace again." At that moment, Sheriff Mills emerged from behind the barn, stopping short when he saw the gathered crowd and realized he'd been caught. His deputies followed, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. "This is a police operation," Mills called out, striding toward them with forced confidence. "Everyone needs to clear the area immediately." "Not without a warrant, Sheriff," Bill replied loudly, several people filming the confrontation with their phones. "What exactly are you searching for in the middle of the night during a thunderstorm?" Mills's hand moved to rest on his holstered weapon, a gesture that sent a chill through the group. "We received an anonymous tip about drug manufacturing equipment in the barn. I don't need a warrant when there's immediate concern about destruction of evidence." "That's a lie," Eleanor said, her voice remarkably steady. "And you know it. Mrs. Winters, I'm placing you under arrest for interfering with a police investigation," Mills announced, taking a step toward the porch. Sam moved to stand between Mills and Eleanor. "No, you're not. You're trespassing on private property without a legal warrant, and you're violating a direct court order protecting these citizens from your harassment." The standoff stretched taut as the rain continued to pour down, soaking everyone involved. Mills's face was a mask of cold fury, while his deputies exchanged uncertain glances behind him. "Last warning, Mercer," Mills said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Step aside, or I'll arrest you for obstruction." Sam didn't move. "Go ahead, Sheriff. Arrest me in front of 30 witnesses with cameras while violating a state court injunction. See how that works out for you." For a moment it seemed Mills might actually draw his weapon. His hand tightened on the grip, his face flushed with rage and humiliation. Then bright headlights swept across the scene as several vehicles pulled into the driveway, state police cruisers followed by an unmarked car. Lieutenant Wallace emerged from the lead vehicle, taking in the situation with a practiced eye. "Sheriff Mills," he called out, approaching with calm authority. "I received multiple reports of suspicious activity at this address. Would you care to explain what your department is doing here?" Mills straightened, dropping his hand from his weapon. "Following up on an anonymous tip, Lieutenant. Possible drug manufacturing." "At midnight? In a rainstorm?" Wallace asked skeptically. "Without notifying the state police, despite knowing this property is connected to an ongoing investigation by the Attorney General's office." Before Mills could respond, another figure emerged from the unmarked car, a sharp-featured woman in a raincoat who introduced herself as Deputy Attorney General Catherine Lang. "Sheriff Mills," she said crisply, "I'm hereby serving you with notice that you've been temporarily relieved of duty pending the completion of our investigation into corruption and abuse of power in Riverdale County." She handed him an official document, protected in a plastic sleeve. "Your department will be under state supervision effective immediately. Please surrender your badge and service weapon to Lieutenant Wallace." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain and distant thunder. Mills stood frozen, clutching the document, his face a study in disbelief and fury. "This is outrageous," he finally sputtered. "You can't just—" "We can and we have," Lang interrupted. "The evidence of your collusion with North Star Development is substantial and growing by the hour. Mr. Finch from the assessor's office provided a signed statement this evening, detailing how you pressured him to target specific properties for reassessment. And one of your deputies has come forward about your instructions to harass certain landowners." She glanced at the deputies standing awkwardly behind Mills. "I suggest you comply immediately, Sheriff. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." After a moment of tense silence, Mills slowly unclipped his badge and removed his gun belt, handing them to Lieutenant Wallace with barely contained rage. "This isn't over," he muttered, glaring at Sam. "Actually, it is," Lang replied. "At least for you." As two state troopers escorted Mills to one of their vehicles, the remaining deputies were instructed to return to the station, where state officials would be waiting to take their statements. The crowd of farmers and neighbors erupted in relieved conversation as the gravity of what had just happened sank in. Sheriff Mills, the man who had terrorized them for weeks, had been removed from power, and the state had stepped in to protect them. Eleanor approached Sam, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "It's really over, isn't it?" Sam put an arm around her shoulders. "Mills is done, and without him, North Star loses their muscle. The Attorney General's investigation will uncover everything now." In the days that followed, the full extent of the corruption scheme unraveled rapidly. Judge Hawkins resigned. 2 county commissioners were indicted. Victor Rawlings disappeared, apparently recalled by Carlisle International's damage control team. A week later, Carlisle issued a terse statement announcing the dissolution of North Star Development and the abandonment of all planned projects in Riverdale County, citing local regulatory challenges. The community gathered at Sam's farm to celebrate, a proper barbecue this time with no interruptions from corrupt officials. Children played freely, neighbors laughed and shared food, and a sense of profound relief permeated the gathering. Rachel Martinez was there too, working on a follow-up piece about rural communities standing up to corporate interests. "You know," she told Sam as they watched the celebration, "what happened here could become a blueprint for other communities facing similar threats." Sam nodded thoughtfully. "People forget sometimes that democracy isn't just about voting. It's about standing up for what's right, even when those in power try to intimidate you into silence." Eleanor joined them, looking more relaxed than Sam had seen her in weeks. "I'll tell you what it really comes down to," she said with the wisdom of her years. "Knowing what's worth fighting for. This land, this community, it's not just dirt and buildings. It's our heritage, our future." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across fields that would remain in the hands of those who had worked them for generations, Sam felt a deep sense of gratitude. The fight had been hard, the outcome uncertain until the very end, but they had prevailed by standing together against corruption and greed. Duke lay contentedly at his feet, sensing his master's peace of mind. The threat was gone, the community was safe, and tomorrow would bring another day of honest work on land that remained their own. Some battles were worth fighting, no matter the odds. And sometimes, even in a world where money and power seemed to dictate everything, justice could still prevail.